Brothers and sisters and friends, welcome back to this symposium on banking and financial services. Yesterday, I think we had a very fruitful day of discussions and sharing of information. One of the goals we set for this symposium was once again to generate debate in the public, and indeed, the symposium was well covered by the media. This morning, while I was driving in, I was listening to the radio, and they did indeed talk about our symposium. And on the CBC Radio Canada website, they talk about it, and they say that postal workers are going ahead, they're forging ahead, they want to convince Canadians that we should have postal banking services and so on. So I think that is an achievement that indeed we should applaud. So we should applaud ourselves for that. So thank you for all those who worked for this to happen, for this symposium to be publicized, and I think that the communications people have done their homework. This is part of our strategy to forge ahead, and it's part of our vision for the postal universal public service. It's part of our struggle to maintain that service. I will probably revisit yesterday's discussions before starting today's agenda. When we go back to the same hour yesterday, we realized that Sister Linda McQuaig talked to us about banks and the Canadian banking system. It is well established, and it's a monopoly, and in reality, she demonstrated to us that the Canadian banking system is not at all interested in postal banking services because they control the system across the board with banking charges, and we realized that they could also control the other groups offering financial services. But Linda McQuaig also left us with the message that postal banking must be part of the progressive union and policy agenda, and that it is part of our vision for social change. I think it's crucial to emphasize that aspect of our struggle that is ongoing. Postal banking services, we want to have that, and for us it's also part of social banking, and it should be for all Canadians. They should have access to that service. So that is a very powerful message. After that, Brother John Anderson talked to us about the feasibility of a postal bank in Canada. It's feasible, and John Anderson brushed aside the arguments of Canada Post, according to which it's too complicated, it's not our sector. But there is experience, both on the government side and on the side of the postal workers, as far as postal banking services are concerned. So it's doable. And the first step consists in setting up what we call a working group to look at the shape that this could take in Canada. After that, Simon Tremblay-Pepin contextualized things for us and showed how we can protect the universal postal public service and the arguments to use against those groups that are promoting the privatization of postal services that we want to keep public and universal. And he talked about some experiences from other countries and how privatization didn't yield the expected results. I think we had a very fruitful debate on that topic. And that debate showed that postal banking services are the way of the future, and that it is one of the key elements of postal services, that we want to be self-sufficient. After that, we looked at the different models. For instance, the model from Great Britain and France, and we saw that postal banking services had a different history there because it had been running for years, so their struggle to set it up was different. But we saw how the unions got involved in Great Britain and in France, to back the setting up of postal banking services, including the training of workers, but also we saw that the revenues generated by the postal banking services enabled the maintenance of postal services that would be efficient. And at the same time, we focused on the link that must exist between postal services, that is letter carriers, and the public, a key link that will help extend government services being provided as well. So those are key examples. And after that, we talked about the U.S. situation, which is similar to what we're experiencing here in Canada, with the whole issue of, firstly, dealing with the mail volume drop, which are real. Nobody is denying the drop in mail volume, but we want to determine how to maximize the U.S. postal system's mandate, and also trying to garner public support in order to maintain that U.S. postal service. And they talked about an action plan that will galvanize all U.S. unions in order to protect the U.S. postal system and extend into postal banking. Then our brother talked about what was happening. The brother did the mapping of the two big regions, two big major regions in Canada, the Greater Toronto Area and then Newfoundland and Labrador, by superimposing the realities of the two sectors from the standpoint of the major banks, and then the presence of post offices, and then the pay loan businesses such as Money Mart, and how they are located, and showing how postal banking services could reach a major category of Canadians who would have access to low-cost banking and financial services compared to the services being offered by those payday loan agencies. So we had a good debate. I think the quality of the debate was really very high. Everybody is really satisfied with what we did yesterday. This morning, we will continue, firstly, with the models, and then after that, we'll have a roundtable on the social repercussions of postal banking services. So I think it's important to paint a picture that will enable us to go further and to strengthen our strategy. And hearing the ideas of our brothers and sisters from Europe and other parts of the world will enable us to determine what model would apply in Canada. And we could borrow from the various models the points that we find interesting. This morning, we have two speakers. We will do what we did yesterday, that is give them the opportunity to make their presentations, and after that we'll take questions and we'll have a discussion. And I welcome our brothers and sisters who are watching us live on the live stream and on the internet. So the first speaker will be the representative of the Italian Postal Banking Service, Brother Luca Burgalassi, who has been a postal worker since the 80s. So he experienced he lived the experience of being a letter carrier, but also he later worked for the Italian Postal Bank. And he represents a union that basically represents about 50% of the workers in Italy in that sector. Actually, all the workers in Italy, so they're about 140,000. The SLP-CISL union represents 140,000 workers, and Brother Luca Burgalassi is the vice president of the union in Italy. And we had the letter from the secretary of the union there wishing us good luck in our discussions. Luca has the floor now. Thank you, Denis. I apologize to you all, especially to the interpreters, because I am not, I don't speak French very well, so today I decided to read very slowly my speech or my report, and I hope that everything will work out fine. Before I start my report, I would like to introduce myself and to greet you and thank you all. So my name is Luca Burgalassi. I work for the Italian Postal Service, where I am also the Assistant Secretary General of the Union of Postal Workers. As Denis said, this is the biggest union in Italy in the postal sector, with over 50% of the workers represented, and in particular, I am responsible for bargaining. I also expressed to the Canadian Postal Workers Union the greetings from my union, and in particular the greetings from the Secretary General of my union, Mario Petito, who is also the Vice President of Unipost Europe, that is the international union of that sector in Europe. Finally, I would like to warmly thank Denis and the whole union in Canada for this invitation, which has given me the opportunity to tell you about the story of the Italian Post Office, which is particularly a rich experience and which is a success. My report will be in two parts. Firstly, I would like to tell the participants about the current situation of the Italian Postal Service, and for that I have to very quickly go over the events that marked the Italian Postal Service in the last 15 years. The Italian Postal Service, up till 1988, was a public agency that would offer traditional postal services, that is delivering letters and parcels and pay services. In 1988, the Italian Postal Service was transformed because of the government's desire to become the sole, which was the sole shareholder, and it became an equity-based corporation, and it stayed within the government, in government hands. The transformation of the postal service meant that the corporation had to work with the proper instruments, because the postal sector was being deregulated and was being open to competition for the first time in Italy. For 15 years, that is from 1988 onwards, the Italian Postal Service went through a delicate period of turnarounds and the preparation or the offering of new services. Early in this 15-year period, the Italian Postal Service was still publicly administered and had a high deficit, and the quality of services was poor. The services offered from 1998 by the Postal Service were traditional services such as letters and postcards and parcels and pay services. There was no innovation, so the situation was very difficult, both for the Postal Service and for the workers. So from 1998, though, the Italian Post launched a new policy which involved an economic turnaround and the development of financial services. So once again, from 1999, through European Union negotiations, postal services, postal services started in Italy and in the European Union. And in 2011, in 2001, therefore, the market was totally open, and the market is open to competition today. But the Italian Post is still the main shareholder. So as you know, traditional postal services based on paper correspondence was hit by a major crisis in Italy as well as in the entire Western world. There was the structural crisis resulting from new technologies and e-substitution with the expansion of Internet. And to that was added a new crisis resulting from the difficulties of the economy. And in Italy, a lot of businesses went out of business. And the advertising budget, for instance, was slashed, and that hit the post office. And the government operations were also being streamlined, and the postal services were reduced. On this slide, you can see the drop in the mail volume for the Italian Post. This mail volume drop had worsened by 40% since 2007 and seems to be a major long-term trend. So the outlook for Italy is not good, and the same applies to the other Western countries. So after the transformation into a shareholder corporation in 1998 of the postal system, a new management was put in place. So from 1999, the new management of the Italian Post launched a policy involving the improvement of services in order to eliminate the huge deficit the company was carrying. In the same year, this new company launched what they call the Postal Vita, or the insurance company. That's when the new organ of the future Italian group Post was set up. From that year, the Italian Post created various other corporations, wholly owned, specializing in innovative products, mostly of a banking, financial nature, compared with the traditional services offered until then, that is paper correspondence and pay services. Today, the Italian Post Group, through its companies, is involved in new markets such as insurance, telephone services, credit services, digitization, and other services. And one of the new services offered by the Italian Post is financial transactions through mobile phones for those who have a current post office account. So that is the diversification of the Italian Post that I talked about. You can see here the services that the Italian Post offers today. So up until 1998, the Italian Post was a single conventional post company offering postal and payment services. It employed 175,000 people. Today, however, the Italian Post is the parent company of holdings that employ approximately 142,000 people, including 60,000 working in postal services. They take care of many postal, financial, and electronic communication services. The Italian Post Group delivers correspondence in every community 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, whereas the financial offices are also opened on Saturdays, unlike banks in Italy. On this slide, you can see the representation, the current representation of the Italian Post Group. These are all the corporations specializing that the corporation controls that operate synergistically with the parent company. We have 26 specialized companies in this Italian Post Group.
We have Postal Spa, a service of digitization. We have Poste Secura, Poste Vita, an insurance company. We have Banque du Midi. We have Docutel Communications. We have 26 different companies specialized in different fields. And here is the makeup of the revenue of the Postal Group last year. 57% of profits are guaranteed today by the insurance service, 22% by the financial service, etc., and only 19% comes in from the traditional postal service. At the present time, we have the digital service, the telephone service, which represents only 20% of profits. So you can see why my union has always supported the need of preserving the principle of unity of the company. Lately, the Italian government had proposed to separate the insurance service from the postal service, and we're very happy to see that this was rejected. Now, the idea of fragmenting the services would mean imperiling the management of the company. In 15 years, the Postal Group changed its organization and services. We had to reduce the number of employees to reduce the deficit, but we also had to find new professional activities to ensure the distribution of quality services, financial and banking. Now, the union has played a very important role in these changes over the last 15 years. Working with the union, consensus was reached, so there were no strikes. The reduction of membership in the postal service was compensated by new activities in the banking and financial services. Many workers in the postal service retired, and retired early, but many others, especially the younger ones, were retrained in the financial sector. Yesterday you spoke of training. So training was a very important tool. Now, starting in 2007, 3 agreements were signed. Because of the crisis and the reduction in the volume of mail, all unions and the management agreed to reduce jobs by 15,000 positions. The surplus staff went off on early retirement, and others were sent to the financial services. Unlike the postal service, the financial sector is expanding. So we transferred many workers from the postal service to the financial service. Today, Italian Post is the largest logistical and technological infrastructure company in Italy. It has 13,000 post offices, which is a large network of small supermarkets where postal, financial, telephone, banking, digital, and insurance services are sold. The group also provides government services, for example, passport renewal services, the issuing of visas for foreigners, and so on. Correspondence and package delivery is provided by approximately 2,500 distribution centers, and they have iPads, tablets, so they can offer financial services at home. Now, here you can see the infrastructure of Italian Post today. Italian Post is a large infrastructure. We have the physical network made up of 13,000 post offices, 2,500 offices. We have the international technology infrastructure. We have the logistical network. But we also have the multi-channel access network for the internet. We have ATMs and other services. Yesterday you spoke of privatization of the post office. From now to the end of the year, 40% of Italian Post capital will be tied to the Italian international stock markets. Italian Post today has a large market value of between 10 to 12 billion euros. So the government has decided to sell part of its postal shares to reduce the public deficit. But the state will continue to have the majority of shares. The unions are not against this kind of privatization, but only if it is guaranteed that the services remain united in one corporation. That is the condition we imposed to continue our support. In conclusion of the first part of my report, I can say that without service diversification and the addition of financial services, the group would today be one of the many Western companies in crisis. Operations would have collapsed. But on the contrary, thanks to its service offering diversification policy, Italian Post was able to maintain a strong presence on the market and to offset postal sector losses with financial services. Now, the second part of my presentation, please. The second part of my presentation is an analysis of the services Italian Post now offers. And this has been a success since 2003. Now, the Italian Post Group's current market offering is based on three types of products. We have the Italian Post products, postal and payment products, but that doesn't include the banking services. Then we also have the products from the Postal Group's companies, postal, financial, and digital products, as well as insurance, telephone, and e-commerce products. Finally, we have all these products are offered in Italian Post retail network. And so all these products are offered in Italian Post retail network, a large infrastructure made up of 13,000 post offices and business agents and financial promoters. Italian Post is not a bank. It doesn't have such a charter. Which belong only to the Italian banks. But Italian Post has decided to offer banking services through certain means. By buying a small bank, Banco de Giorno, we were able to offer financial services to small companies in the south of Italy. And by signing agreements with Italian and foreign banks, we have been able to sell products or banking products through our post offices. So, in our banks, we prepare the work and then send it off to the banks, which authorize the service, especially concerning loans. In the last 15 years, we've changed the format for our offices. Until 1998, postal offices had wickets. We had wickets for postal services and another wicket for payments. But today, the post office is much greater. On top of the payment postal services, we have other sales, for example, financial services, banking services, telephone services, and insurance. Financial products are offered through consultative sales, and this is based on the banking model. Insurance and mobile phone products are provided by special corners where the product brand is present. In the main post offices of the largest cities, we have financial promoters. Right now, we have only 100, but that should increase to 400 next year. And they have, so these promoters work on an assigned territory. Here you have a picture of our post office today. We have the postal wicket for letters. We have the payment wicket, where you can see the symbol of the euro. But we also have the consulting rooms for insurance, for example, the same way as the banks do. We also have specialized corners, for example, the Postal shop, which sells retail products, books, music CDs, gifts, mobile phones, and so on. And we have the insurance corner. And all of this is in the post office. We also have the telephone corner. So today, the post office is a small supermarket of services and products. Now, I will analyze the different products of Italian Post. Here you see the products sold directly by Italian Post. We offer all postal services such as stamps, payment, and letter mail. The payment service of Italian Post are prepaid credit cards and bank accounts. We call this a postal bank, but here we don't offer loans. The Italian Postal Bank is not a real bank. The offer of postal services is available within the post office, but for companies that you can have access from home. The delivery, as we pointed out, is offered 5 days a week throughout the country from Monday to Friday. But the letter carriers have tablets which allow them to make payments during their door-to-door delivery. Here we have the products of the specialized companies. These are postal services, financial services, digital, but also insurance and mobile phones. The insurance services are linked to loans, investment, and the protection of people offer most of our profits. In 2013, the insurance represented 57% of our total profit. The mobile phone service, Postal Mobile, are expanding. In a few years, the mobile telephone service became the main virtual operator. We have more than 3 million SIM cards. In the last year, Italy Post was authorized to buy the Mediagiorno Bank, and through this bank we can offer long-term loans for SMEs in southern Italy. Poste Italienne doesn't have a bank charter, and that is why we bought a small bank to be able to offer these services. On this slide, we can see the group holdings products that are offered by partners. These are banking and financial services. Italian Post has signed agreements with some of the large banking groups, such as Deutsche Bank, Unicredit, and others. We are in partnership with these banks. We receive part of the profits from this work. Now, we also work with Crown Corporation that issues credits. This case works with us, and we receive a part of the profits from the case. In conclusion, I'd like to point out the financial results of Italy Post in the last few years. Here you go. These are the results of diversification. As I've said in the past, up until 1998, Italy Post had a huge deficit. A policy of diversification and development have brought about profits since 2003. Since then, we have constant increase of these profits. In 2003, we had 90 million euros profit. In 2013, a profit of 1 billion. So we were able to diversify our services, offering financial and insurance services. So profits have doubled in the last few years, thanks to diversification. One final thing, the Italian Union has asked the government to allow workers to participate in the increasing wealth of the company. So the union asked profit sharing for workers. We've started this discussion, and I hope that we will succeed in getting profit sharing. So, Denis, I have finished. Thank you all for listening to me, and I'm sorry for my French, but that's the way it is.
Non, merci beaucoup. Je pense que la présentation.
No, thank you very much. I think your presentation was very clear. It shows that innovation and diversification and service expansion is a solution for the future. I believe that Canada Post had a strategic mistake in the 1990s. Instead of attacking the workers, reducing services, they should have been more progressive. They should have looked at what was being done elsewhere, such as in Italy. Because we see that when we see the pictures with the different type of services, your different corners, we can see that we could do the same thing and reproduce that model here in Canada. And that is what the union is proposing. So thank you very much for your presentation.
George Collins is the National Postal Logistic Organizer for the EPMU, the Engineering, Printing, and Manufacturing Union. That's a union who include the postal workers and letter carriers. So they have about 4,000 postal workers in New Zealand. So he will come and talk to us about the Kiwi Bank. I think every one of us, we heard in the past of the past 6, 7 years about Kiwi Bank and success and problem, and up and downs. And I think it would be really interesting to see what is really the history of Kiwi Bank. And George, before being, so his first name is George. He was a banker, George, before. So George was a banker before working with the union. So welcome, George, and do your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Denny, and thank you for yourself and also your team for making us feel so welcome while we're so far away from home. Sorry, I'm dropping the gadgets. Well, before I start, I'd just like to sort of set the scene. What I will be doing is introducing myself, giving you a little bit of information about the New Zealand political and union scenes, the New Zealand postal sector, and the Kiwi Bank story, which is a good one. A bit of a critique of New Zealand Post and Kiwi Bank, and then talk about the future, and then see if there's any questions. Well, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, bonjour, hello. Warm greetings from the first peoples of Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, New Zealand. My name is George Collins, and I am the National Industry Organiser for Postal and Logistics, representing the New Zealand Amalgamated Engineering, Printing and Manufacturing Union, known as the EPMU. I am here to talk to you about the experience of New Zealand Post and the creation of Kiwi Bank. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the reason why I'm wearing a red poppy today. A few days ago, it was Anzac Day in New Zealand, and on April the 25th, 1915, New Zealand and Australian forces fought side by side in the Battle of Gallipoli in Turkey. In 2015, there will be the 100-year commemorations. It is a national day in New Zealand, and with many festivities, including dawn parades. Least shall we forget, and we will remember them. I've been in Canada about a week, and people just can't understand my accent. So what I thought I'd do before I start my speech is give you a crash course on what we call Quinglish. I may sound like an Australian, Martin over there, yeah, but I'm not. I am a Kiwi. For some typical greetings, would you please repeat after me so you get the feeling? Kia ora. That is the Maori language, the first people of New Zealand, and what that means is hello. Could you repeat after me? G'day. That means hello. Could you repeat after me? How's it going? That means how are you? Could you repeat after me? Sweet as, bro. Or cheer, bro. That means everything is good. Thank you, my friend. And now here's one that will definitely confuse you. And I've got a prize that is on a very Kiwi thing, a pack and save bag, which is a supermarket chain in New Zealand. But what I've got in it is some clothing from the EPMU, and whoever gets this, I'm happy to give it to you and then share it amongst the Canadian Union. So if anyone can, well, first let's say it. Yeah, nah. Does anyone know what that means? Get out of here. What it means is, yes, I acknowledge you, but I disagree with you. So you're here in New Zealand, yeah, nah, which is kind of yes but no. But I think, yes, this madam here, I'd like to give you a T-shirt for that interpretation. So thank you very much, and hopefully that helps with the accent. And just on the accent, and also the way Kiwis speak, just last week, members of the royal family came to New Zealand. And I think we lost the opportunity to officially apologise to the Queen for our part in single-handedly murdering the English language. So let's talk more about the land down under and give you some of its background. So, yeah, that's it, yeah. The political environment, well, New Zealand is a small country. It's made up of 4.5 million people. Like Canada, it is part of the Commonwealth, and its head of state is the Queen, represented by the Governor-General. Our political leader is a Prime Minister who heads the government by winning a majority in our unicameral parliament. New Zealand is a Western democracy, and its electoral system is MMP, or mixed member proportional representation. This means a voter has two votes, one for the party and the other for the local representative. We have a 3-year term of Parliament, and there's an election this year in September 20. The current government is a Conservative one, made up of coalition parties to secure its majority. It has a neoliberal approach to their economy. Just the union scene in New Zealand. New Zealand is about 20% unionised, with the private sector having about 10%. The union I work for is the largest private sector union, responsible for 11 different industries. Since 1991, the union movement has been under attack by the development of a contract for service model as opposed to an employment relationship. And they've done this through legislation. The current government, much like previous Conservative governments, has had high on its agenda to smash the unions. Currently, there is a bill before Parliament to continue doing this by weakening collective bargaining, reducing wages, and terms of conditions. There are a handful of unions that are affiliated to the main Progressive Party, the Labour Party. The sector I represent, postal and logistics, is highly unionised, which enjoys a strong level of engagement with the employer. So let's look at the postal sector in more detail. So there's the old teller, the old post office. That's what it used to look like. So the New Zealand Post Office started the 20th century as a government department. It had 3 units. The post office, I'll just see if it, hang on, I'll go back. No, it's not going to bring, yeah. Oh, there it is there, here. It had 3 units, the post office, the savings bank, or post office savings bank, and a telephone exchange. In the 1980s, a progressive government adopted a neoliberal approach and deregulated the economy. So on the 1st of April, 1987, the New Zealand Post Office was corporatised, and its core businesses were split into 3 separate companies. Telecom, which was the old Post Office Exchange, Post Bank, which was the Post Office Savings, and New Zealand Post, which remains today. Each company was and still is expected to operate as a commercial entity. It is governed by legislation with the following principles: be profitable and efficient, be a good employer, and demonstrate a sense of social responsibility, commonly known as the public good. The rise of Kiwibank. Kiwibank had its beginnings in Postbank, and Postbank lasted only 2 years until it was sold to the Australian ANZ Banking Group in 1990. Those things are important. I'll go back one. And just have a look at the screen there, and I suppose that's a banking boulevard anywhere in New Zealand. And you'll see the National Bank. Well, the National Bank was owned by Lloyd's of London, but now it's owned by ANZ. Then you have a look at ANZ behind it, and again, that's Australia New Zealand Banking Group, owned by the Australians. And then have a look, there's a little yellow and sort of grey, it says ASB Bank. Well, the ASB Bank was a community bank, and it sold 75% of its shares to the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So the banking boulevard in New Zealand is pretty much Australian. Well, it is Australian. So in the 80s and 90s, you saw a radical neoliberal economic reforms sweep across New Zealand. New Zealand led by both progressive and conservative governments. This saw the banking system reduce the number of banks in New Zealand and hand ownership to the Australians. For example, listen to the irony, the Bank of New Zealand is now owned by the National Australia Bank. 2 regional community banks, such as it's now called the ASB, it was the Auckland Savings Bank and Trust Bank, ended up in the hands of Westpac and the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. And eventually, the National Bank of New Zealand was sold to ANZ, which is also Australian. Only at the time, one small bank remained in New Zealand hands, and that was Taranaki Savings Bank, or TSB. So by the time a change of government came in 1999, 2 things had occurred serendipitously in favour of a government-sponsored New Zealand bank. Firstly, there was a nationalistic drive to have a Kiwi-owned bank, given that ownership and profits of the other banks were all going to Australia. Secondly, back in New Zealand in 1996, New Zealand had reformed its electoral system. This meant that coalition partners were required to hold negotiations before governments were formed. And there you go, there he is. Jim Anderton, who was a coalition partner with the Progressive Party, who became Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Economic Development, He pushed for a New Zealand-owned government bank as part of a coalition deal in the newly elected Progressive government. So in 2002, Kiwi Bank launched into the New Zealand public arena. Join the movement was the catchphrase and the marketing campaign to revolutionise the bank sector in New Zealand. Arguably, this was going back to the future by reinstitutionalising a government-owned bank. However, it caught the hearts and minds of the New Zealand public. Kiwi Bank is a wholly owned subsidiary of New Zealand Post. The movement grew quickly, and with New Zealand Post capitalising on its existing postal retail network to provide banking services, this resulted in the sharing of in-house services and staff. A key concern at the time was that Kiwi Bank needed to overcome, and in some respects still does, is to appease its critics who felt that it was inappropriate for the government to be in banking. This criticism was coming from the right of the political spectrum. The criticism all went quiet when the Progressive government of the day appointed a previous Conservative Prime Minister, Jim Bolger, as its inaugural chair of the Kiwi Bank Board and New Zealand Post. Probably just have a look there, and that's what you'll get when you walk into a New Zealand Post Kiwi Bank branch. You'll get the red of New Zealand Post and you'll get the green of Kiwi Bank, and they coincide together. Now, if you have you probably can't see it there, but if you have a look at the green, what it does is it promotes what New Zealand's all about. You know, there's a place called Paraparaumu. Does anyone know where that is? And it's got a big tree in the middle of it, a pahutakawa tree. That's the sort of thing Kiwi Bank does. So hopefully I'm painting a bit of a picture of what Kiwi Bank's all about and how it promotes itself, which is very important. So I'd like to do a bit of a critique of Kiwi Bank. Depending on who you speak to, the governance framework is either a positive or a negative. Some academics and professionals I spoke to in preparing this speech had concerns about blurred governments, more specifically the interconnectedness of both New Zealand Post and Kiwi Bank boards. The Reserve Bank Act, which kind of controls banking in New Zealand, requires Kiwi Bank to be at an arm's length of its parent New Zealand Post. Therefore, Kiwi Bank have a board of its own, although it's arguably a business unit of the New Zealand Post Group. Here are just some examples. Jim Bolger, the ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand, who I spoke about previously, who was appointed the inaugural chair of Kiwi Bank, was also the chair of New Zealand Post. The current New Zealand chairman of New Zealand Post, an ex-Minister of Finance, Sir Michael Cullen, sits on both boards. The CEO of the New Zealand Post Group, Brian Roach, is a member of the Kiwi Bank board. So, speaking to this, and I had some sort of difficult conversations with, how would you say, operational leaders about this, but they defended the situation, explaining it was helpful for institutional knowledge and strengthening relationships. They also said that the view was, well, their argument was, you need a clear sense of direction and it makes your jobs easier. So, yeah. Economic sustainability. The biggest concern that Kiwi Bank has is its funding. Kiwi Bank advised it would be self-sustainable by now. This hasn't happened and it won't until 2017. New Zealand Post has funded the bank by a value of $360 million, and the question is how long can that continue? Last year, Kiwi Bank was downgraded from AA- to A+ by the international credit rating agency Standard & Poor's. This was due to Kiwibank not having a parent company such as a wealthy overseas bank, and it had nothing to do with the bank itself. It was just New Zealand Post. In 2013, Kiwibank made most of New Zealand Post Group's profit. New Zealand Post made $121 million and Kiwibank made $79 million of it. So New Zealand Post is struggling to afford the amount of capital it requires for Kiwibank to be a competitive bank in the future. The group is committed for the long term, and by the group I mean New Zealand Post Group. This is demonstrated by the commitment of $100 million to upgrade its IT, hopefully computers, yeah, good, and core banking services. It is also committed to 50 new Kiwibank stores in strategic areas in New Zealand. And I would assume that means Auckland and a number of areas around Auckland. It would mean Wellington, and it would mean Christchurch. The current strategy is to grow the bank and find cheaper ways to deal with declining mail volumes. Ownership of retail post shops will be reduced and will be replaced by host businesses. And what that means is, well, it's really interesting. All the models that I've heard of over the last couple of days, similar. They'll find businesses like, for example, bookshops who'll have a bank in them, and that's where the postal services will be. The bank has done very well capturing the hearts and minds of New Zealanders. The bank now has 850,000 customers, representing 23% of New Zealand's bank customers. It's diversed into other financial products such as managed funds and insurances. It's increased its loan advances by 6.5%, and it has also increased its customer deposits by 43%. And this is further reinforced in a statement of corporate intent to Parliament. So Post is very serious about growing the bank. I suppose the negatives are that Kiwibank was set up to revolutionise the New Zealand banking scene through low fees. But I suppose if you have a look at, there's been three other New Zealand banks started up since 1999. And TSB, or the Taranaki Savings Bank that I mentioned, it has returned 10% to its shareholders, and Kiwibank hasn't returned a dividend to New Zealand Post. More than 50% of Kiwibank customers have their main banking elsewhere, and this is costly for the bank to administer. An example of this is the bank's cost to income ratio is 68%, whereas other banks average is about 48%. And Kiwibank only has 10.7% of the market share. It's still a small player and possibly only around about 5% of the mortgage market. Oh, that's not right. Okay. The relationship between New Zealand Post and Kiwibank is a sort of parent-child one. New Zealand Post had the dominant role, but as Kiwibank matures, I ask myself, who needs who the most? Because what's happening is, in my draft, I said the petulant child has now grown into a teenager and needs, is sort of finding its own way in life. Yes, Kiwibank needs more capital, and that is coming from Post, but Post needs Kiwibank, and it needs it so it can modernise and restructure its core postal service to have a viable postal service in the future. And have a look at this. This is called the big picture from New Zealand Post, but if you have a look carefully, the way Post is working is that everything it does comes back, you see, into the New Zealand Post network, and Kiwibank is a big part of that. And just have a look at, you've got the stores network, which is a part of KiwiBank. If you have a look at the overseas stuff, that's all about what's called UPost. And what it does is it's online. And, you know, someone mentioned Amazon yesterday. Well, we've got Trade Me. And, you know, that's about growing the parcels. The parcels come in, so UPost, it's all sorted out by New Zealand Post. It's collected in places like Britain and America, and big container ships come over, and then they go straight into another New Zealand Post company, ECL. So you can see they've got it all sorted out for the future. And, you know, so New Zealand Post is currently going through various restructures. The major changes are a loss of 2,000 jobs over the next 4 years, reducing 16 mail centres down to 3, changing the 1 day across town standard to 3 days, and that's because of the reduction in the mail processing centres. Beforehand, you had mail processing centres scattered around New Zealand. Now there'll only be 3, and that'll be Christchurch, Palmerston North, and also Auckland. And you say, why not Wellington, where I come from? And yeah, I'm pretty upset about the whole thing, but that's another story. And see me afterwards and I'll explain it to you. Yeah. They also want to amend the deed of understanding with the government so they can go to a 3-day delivery, which has been approved. And I'll give you an example of what happened. Is, you know, Post wanted a 3-day delivery. It came back with 3-day for urban areas and 5-day for rural areas. And do you know why that is? Because the Conservative government, the national government in New Zealand, its support is in rural areas. Yeah. And where possible, the combining of delivery and courier sites, and this is again a part of the strategy, and if you have a look at the little vans there, New Zealand Post has a business called ECL, Express Couriers Limited, and they're a yellow, like the colour is yellow and red, you know, which is New Zealand Post. And what they want to do is put those two together in areas that make sense. So what it means is if there's an ECL site and a New Zealand Post site in, say, well, for example, I don't know, a rural area, say Tamaranui or somewhere like that, well then what they'll do is that will be a joint site. And it's called Single Delivery Agent, and it's already been trialled in a place called Tauranga. So the work itself will have to adapt and these changes, and the work model is also being looked at the future. New Zealand is comparing itself to the Norwegian model due to the similar nature of country, the size and geography. This is going to cost New Zealand Post a lot of money. Well, just a small example of it, and like I say, I just don't have the time to get into it. And yeah, but if you think about all the posties on bikes and walking posties, well, they'll be replaced with electric vehicles. You know, and all you got to do is have a look at the Norwegian model, and that's exactly the way New Zealand's going. So, Post is confident about making a viable business out of the new products and the increase in parcel volumes. The concern is that it will never replace the lost revenue generated from 217 million letter items. And have a look at this. That's just the plan, what they've been doing. That there is the plan, and if you have a look, see the Kiwi bird and the financial services? Well, that's effectively what the plan is saying is we're going to be a mail logistics, but our biggest part is going to be financial services. But here's the worry for New Zealand Post. The declining mail. And the declining mail is, at the moment, we have 750 million pieces of mail, And look, New Zealanders are pretty savvy when it comes to the internet and computers. And so everyone's walking, I mean, these days, for God's sake, don't, like walk across the road in New Zealand, in Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch, because someone will run you over because they'll be on their cell phone, not actually looking. But what it says here, what it shows here, just, giving an example of that, is that the mail is reducing as we all go to digital sort of areas. And what Post is saying is that it's rapidly declining, and if we get to 350 million pieces of mail, then they're going to make some drastic changes. Now, the concern is, and the argument in New Zealand Post is, if they are too quick with these changes, it will just continue the slide a lot quicker. So what they're saying is that's what they think the mail volumes are going to look like, and that's why they're sort of restructuring their business to actually effectively suit the demand and find new products such as I've spoken about. But the issue is where is the capital expenditure required to make these changes going to come from? Well, the answer is Kiwibank, because that's the way they've structured their business, so that the bank will make more profit for the New Zealand Post Group. So the next one I'm saying is the viability and the point of difference for Kiwibank. So Kiwibank understands the situation they're in which is to focus on profitability and not just getting new customers, which they've done over the last 10 years, and they've done it very well. 350,000 customers in sort of 10 years is pretty good. The point of difference is that the New Zealand Post retail network, Kiwibank has the opportunity that no other bank in New Zealand has. Post customers wanting to come and pay bills will send parcels. What happens is they get in front of a Kiwibank salesperson. Now, no other bank in New Zealand has that type of arrangement. So this gives Kiwibank staff the opportunity to sell Kiwibank products to them. And like I say, that doesn't happen elsewhere in New Zealand. Kiwibank needs to turn its 850,000 customers into full bank customers. And how are they going to do that? We're going to do it via the IT network, the new 100 million one, and through customer service. Now, one of the main unique selling points of Kiwibank, it is seriously important that the bank lives its values and is seen by the New Zealand public as genuine. And how are they doing this? Well, this is being demonstrated by Kiwibank being awarded the best and most trusted bank in New Zealand over the last decade. It's had numerous awards about being the best and trusted, and that's very important for Kiwibank. A further example of this is when Kiwibank sponsored the New Zealander of the Year award. And what this is about is homegrown talent who is a New Zealander working for and advocating on behalf of New Zealanders for their betterment. Now, this is really important. Sorry I don't have a slide of this, but this year it was a guy called Dr. Lance O'Sullivan. He's a good-looking guy. Oh, he's beautiful. In a metrosexual way, he's beautiful. And his story is that he's a doctor who went to rural, poor areas in New Zealand and set up a community health clinic. Now, that is just pure gold for Kiwibank, and it fits like a glove with their values, because what it's saying, their view for, is a digital bank with a heart. Their view is a bank that stands up for New Zealanders. Well, that's exactly what the New Zealander of the Year is doing. And so can you see how it all is very important that this narrative and this story keeps on being told about, well, New Zealandness, or, what is a Kiwi. The only problem is the New Zealand-owned story makes it difficult as it's only an advantage over the big Australian banks. It loses that advantage to the New Zealand-owned banks that have the same compelling narrative yet return better dividends. And what I'm referring to is some of the other New Zealand-owned banks have jumped on this sort of narrative and told their, sort of Kiwi fighting against the world story, And politically, if it's sold, then Kiwi Bank becomes just another bank. That's the concern. So just going on to, I suppose, the union story in New Zealand Post and Kiwi Bank, the industrial relations model is a plural and one of engagement. The EPMU meets quarterly with Post senior management. We call it a strategic relationship, as it recognises and accepts the EPMU as the employee. This is the next one, yeah, I'll just put that there. And accepts the EPMU as the employee representative organisation. The company is committed to consulting with us on important issues. Kiwi Bank isn't as well organised as the rest of the Post group, but its staff benefit from the strategic relationship. The EPMU have about 3,500 to 4,000 members in Post, which is about 85% density. The EPMU has been very successful in getting good terms and conditions for Kiwi Bank while only having a small membership. To a certain degree, this environment was created by having a discussion with a wider union movement around demarcation and coverage before Kiwi Bank was set up. In other words, our brothers and sister unions are not competing in the same members on the same patch. The other thing we do there is our narrative also reflects a relationship based on values, i.e. our values, which is solidarity, fairness and equality and equity, as opposed to being adversarial. And why do we do that in Kiwi Bank? That's because Kiwi Bank staffers are trained on how they approach their job, and they take that seriously. So if you walk in there and have big rows with them, it'll turn them off. So, yeah. Now, the next point I thought I'd bring up is just one workforce for the New Zealand Post group. As explained earlier, New Zealand Post staff in the retail network are able to carry out most of the functions of Kiwi Bank. As more of the Post network is reduced, there is an opportunity for the staff to be transferred into the bank. For the most part, staff has accepted that challenge. At the highest level of Post, we have been told that retail network people will be considered for bank positions. But there appears to be a mindset in the bank that anyone from Post is a licker and ticker. Do you know what I mean by that? Okay, let's say, a bureaucrat that can't adapt to the sexy role of salesperson banker. Do you get that? Probably not. I might have to say it again. What I'm saying is, New Zealand Post want their staff to transfer to Kiwi Bank. There's a bit of a undermining sort of view that Post staff aren't up to the job that Kiwi Bank want their staff to do. So we really have to fight for our members. And if there is a declining, which there will be in the store network, a declining sort of jobs, therefore, the option to go to Kiwi Bank should be open for them. And so it's the EPMU's view has always been that the loyalty and hard work of the retail staff should be rewarded, as they were initially the face of Kiwi Bank right from the start. They should be given a high priority as the store network diminishes. And can I suggest, I'm going to, very politely, If Canada Post decides to have a bank, then can I suggest that a heads of agreement is signed between the union and Canada Post, stipulating that there is a transition for retail staff to transfer to the bank. Our view is that the roles are similar and the training over the years has been exactly the same. New Zealand Post appears to see the benefits of giving their existing staff the opportunity of reinventing themselves in a new environment. It definitely keeps down costs down of the retail transformation project, i.e. less redundancies and training, and it provides more employment options for our membership. So the future. I believe the future of Kiwibank is secure. The bank has worked hard on being a sweetheart of the New Zealand public. The culture shift in Kiwibank is already occurring with the vision of Kiwis making Kiwis better off. That's really important. And that narrative has to continue, that story has to continue, and standing up for New Zealanders. The equation is simple for the bank. This is what they have to do, from product to customer, from growth to profitable growth, simplicity and digital first, and turn those 850,000 customers into full customers through IT solutions and service. There are, however, some mitigating circumstances. The politics isn't as simple. If the New Zealand electorate returns a Conservative government on September 20, then it may be likely that the government expands its asset sales strategy and the bank could be a target to be sold. And that would be a disaster. If a progressive government were elected, then the bank will be used as a tool to invest in the economy. So, as they say in New Zealand, it's a political football. I hope you understand that. Gets kicked around either side, you know. Then there's the question of the ever declining mail volumes and the diminishing brand. And I'll go back to make it. There you go. So there's a diminishing mail volumes. I believe the postal brand will continue, but in the hands of contractors or host businesses, which possibly is a little bit like overseas here. The brand will continue to be ubiquitous, but the old post office, where is it? I'll just go back to it so you can get, there you go. The old post office, as we know it, will be resigned to pictures in our social and economic history. The Kiwibank float will continue to grow and be more visible in the main centres, but this will occur slowly until an injection of cash is delivered. But we're asking the question, where from? The government? No one really knows. I'll just go back to where I am. So in summary, the Kiwibank story is working. And why is that? It had the political backing and lobbying right back from the start. It has a commitment of long-term funding from its parent. And it has a unique selling point, which has a connection with Kiwi nationalism and keeping to that narrative. And to help it, it has one union throughout the group to keep terms and conditions strong. And more importantly, the union has a strong strategic relationship that can iron out any speed bumps during that journey. I thank you for your attention. Any questions? Just have a look at the Pahutakawa tree. That's a part of New Zealand. And then the questions, and that's a Kiwi. Thank you.
So thank you, George, to share with us the history of Kiwibank, the challenge of Kiwibank, and I think we made a link with the discussion yesterday around training and the fact that people, there's a transition period. But I think you remind us of the fact that maintaining a postal bank is a political fight, but you're talking about this political environment we're in, and we can compare what happened in New Zealand and here, depending on which party is in power, that will have a big impact on the future of the postal bank. So, and us, we are always talking that when we're talking about this issue about banking, it's part of a view, but it's part at the same time of a political fight. So we'll open the floor for question, comment. So George.
So this question is mostly for Luca. I'm wondering what sort of resistance did the union experience from its membership against the restructuring and diversification of the post office, and did the government have to overcome opposition from the private sector in the expansion into those other areas?
Can you try? Peux-tu essayer, Luca?
Les syndicats en Italie.
The Italian union understood that the restructuring of the business was necessary. So the union agreed with the move. And for 15 years, the union and the corporation have reached a lot of agreements on the restructuring process, because without those agreements, and without the diversification and the development of financial services in the postal sector, well, that sector was destined to die. So the union supported the restructuring and the diversification attempt. And the key thing for the union was the unity of the corporation. And all the unions accepted the privatization proposed by the government and the minority ownership of the postal service capital. But the key condition was to keep together the postal services and the financial services. The postal service will die, and the financial services will be developing. So the union's position was very clear. The Italian government today has one need. That is the need to cut the public deficit. So the Italian government asked the postal service to contribute to that deficit reduction. So the privatization of a minority of the share ownership was one of the answers. And the union wasn't opposed to that. That was the solution that was, for instance, the answer to solving the problem, selling part of the insurance services. So, Luca, how did the ordinary members of the union react? Well, the workers reacted very well, because many workers during the restructuring period were given retraining. So many letter carriers, for instance, became financial services workers through retraining. So the workers are happy with this situation.
Good morning. I'm Susan Knapp, and I represent the National Rural Letter Carriers Association from the United States. I represent 113,000 craft employees. We travel 3.5 million miles per day, have 73,000 routes, and we deliver to 40 million boxes. We call ourselves Post Office on Wheels. And I was very intrigued to hear from Luca the idea that you have carriers who are taking a tablet out to the customer and actually doing some financial services on that tablet. Could you explain some of the financial things that are available through that avenue?
Right now, that tablet service is experimental in part of Italy. But the operating of that service is based on a connection between the tablet and mobile phones of the person. The operations, for the time being, are on a small scale. For instance, payment services, paying for letter service, but it is the fundamental concept that counts. That is the possibility that the letter carrier can go to a home, the home of the person who needs the service, and do things and carry out financial operations, small financial operations though. But it's crucial because in Italy, we have many rural areas. So in rural areas, there are no banks, but there is a letter carrier. The public administration is not there, but the letter carrier is there. There is no police service, but there is a letter carrier. So that offers the possibility of using the postal network for such services. For the time being, the service is experimental. I don't know if that was the right answer. Yes, yes, indeed.
I have one for George. So you talk about, when you talk about New Zealand, so it seems that Australia is always out there. And at the same time, you have three entities. So you have the government, you have New Zealand Post, and the Kiwi Bank. It seems that they're fighting each other. Can you expand a little bit about that? Because we're in a similar situation, fighting each other. We have the government and Canada Post on the same side, and we have all the union fighting to protect themselves. Can you talk a little bit about that fight or this situation between...
Okay, yeah, thanks, Denny. I think probably the wider question is about ideology. And you've got a neoliberal government who doesn't like, how would you say, the government to be in business. So yes, there's always going to be differences around the direction of New Zealand. And if you have a look at the history of New Zealand under a progressive government over the last 30 years, it's been neoliberal. Under a conservative government, it's been neoliberal. Whereas under a progressive government, yes, neoliberalism is still there, but the thing is what they've looked at is more values around social justice. So there's differences there, and that comes into how the government runs its business, what they call New Zealand Inc. That's the first thing. The next thing is about New Zealand Post and Kiwi Bank. Now, I think what it's about is that, like I said in my speech, it was New Zealand Post was the parent, and it decided how Kiwi Bank would work. Now Kiwi Bank is growing, and it's been very successful, and I'm sure now it wants to have the ability to sort of go its own direction, but Post, as its owner, says, well, hang on, we want some say here. And the issue is that there's a lot of restructuring in New Zealand Post. The core, all I do at the moment is spend my days in sort of consulting and debating around the structure of the delivery service. What's that going to look like? Then also the stores network and mail processing, because they are all changing around to suit this new model. Now, the cost of that change. Remember, the core the core postal side only made $1.8 million last year. So, Kiwi Bank is seen as, well, this is the revenue. This is how we're going to do this. So hopefully that answers it. Oh, and then the thing about Australia, well, yeah, a light-hearted thing. Yes, we've got a inferiority complex with the Australians. We always want to beat them at something.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Jeff?
Well, first I'd like to say thank you so much. These are fantastic presentations. George, can you, New Zealand Post has been deregulated for a number of years now, so that allows for competition. And both of you showed slides with the decline of mail. Right. And I know, Luca, Italy has not been deregulated for so long, so I would expect a much less of an impact. But I was wondering if both of you could give us your perspectives on what sort of the impact of deregulation has been with respect to either mail volumes or the behavior of the central posts with respect to adjusting their prices to maintain their volumes.
Well, New Zealand Post is still the main player in New Zealand. You've got a thing called DX Mail, and that's owned by New Zealand Freightways. And they appear, on the face of it, to be sort of constantly biting the heels of New Zealand Post. There was concern by the posties and also, in the campaigns that come up, that New Zealand Post is effectively giving away its business to competition such as DX Mail. And that's because, like everyone else has said here, DX Mail basically just take the cream off the top of the postal businesses in New Zealand. And what I mean by that is they only deliver to the areas that are easy to deliver to. So they're seen in, Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. But any rural stuff, that's quite difficult. Then what happens is they go, oh, this is too hard, and chuck it back into the New Zealand Post system, and it's subsidised. So it's just crazy, absolutely crazy. New Zealand Post, we sat down with them and said, this is a concern to our members, and can you answer the question, why are you subsidising the competition? That's ridiculous. And what they told us was that DX Mail only has a very small share in the marketplace, and they are more interested, and the concern they have is the loss to digitalisation. It's about 80% of New Zealand Post's revenue comes from about 20 customers, which are the big banks, the Inland Revenue Department, all of those areas. And the concern is if they start heading down the digital track, well, that's a big worry to New Zealand Post. So I suppose, to answer your question, they don't see it's not big competition for New Zealand Post, and New Zealand Post really sets the scene, and it really hasn't been affected that much, And the competitors who are allowed in because of the deregulation are only small players.
Sister?
Hi, thanks for your presentations. I was wondering if both actually, Kiwi Bank and the Banco Italia have the name of the Italian bank, Postal Bank, if they have explicit social mandates similar to what Nicola, I think, was mentioning in Belgium, where the Postal Bank cannot refuse a resident bank account, or a similar commitment to community reinvestment. If you're taking deposits from a community, you must extend loans in that community, or microcredit initiatives. So if either of the postal banks have such social mandates, and if they don't, is that something that you think is going to be a mission for the future? especially in light of what you were mentioning, George, in New Zealand, that you've got to kind of grow your market
Values,
share.
yeah. Well, the New Zealand Post, and I say that, is the state-owned enterprise. And in it, the principles of the State-Owned Enterprise Act of 1986 is that they have to, one, be a good employer, but also the other thing is kind of have a social obligation. And that does flow into Kiwi Bank. But when I sit there in front of New Zealand Post or Kiwi Bank people and say, where's your social obligation? Well, usually they say, look, George, do you want to talk about business or shall we get up and walk out? So, I mean, it is, because the management side of it is more, they only do the business side, and effectively the social side is for the politicians. So really, Kiwi Bank, like I say, is its values and its principles are all about standing up for New Zealanders, and a bank, they call it, what is it, a digital bank with a heart, or standing up for New Zealanders, or a bank for New Zealanders. So I think that's the way they're actually trying to, cover off that social obligations. And I mean, yesterday, John Anderson, is John here? Here he is, yeah. John spoke about the Maori loans issue. And the Maori loans, what it is Maori in New Zealand see the land not as, as economic. They see it as a part of them, like their mother. And so Maori land isn't for sale. Now, Kiwi Bank has come up with a way of actually lending to people to build on it. And usually what happens is it's not a state and fee simple. It comes down to, like you loan it for 100 years or so, lease. And so they've come up with ways of lending to that part of the community.
Luca?
The social mission of the Italian Post is crucial. As I said, the Italian Post is everywhere in the country, and especially the postal service is very economical when offered together with banking services. In the postal service in Italy, we have the older workers. The average age is higher, rather, in the postal service. So the social mission is very important. The Italian Post and the Postal Bank has an economic mission, and their social role is to be present across the whole country. Mike.
Mike Palasek, Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Thank you both for your outstanding presentations, but I have a question more aimed at George. There's a certain Conservative member of Parliament who has said that Kiwi Bank hasn't been able to subsidize the operations of the post office, and that it's been a failure. And he's used that as an argument why postal banking shouldn't be brought in Canada in order to help save Canada Post. So my understanding of the situation is that the reason the profitable Kiwi Bank can't be used to subsidize the operations of the post office is actually because of the right-wing policies which have failed, and the deregulation of the post office, that now one part of it can't subsidize the other. Could you just explain that? Is this a real argument that Kiwi Bank couldn't be supporting the post office?
I think you're referring to Rodney Hyde from the ACT Party, is that right?
No, it's one of the members of Parliament here.
Oh, okay, yeah, it sounds like, yeah. 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 It's similar in New Zealand. The protagonists are different, yeah. I think where that comes from is, again, that ideology and the way that the New Zealand Parliament is set up. The New Zealand National Party, which is the Conservatives, have a partner. Well, they have a number of partners, but one of them is the sort of far right. There's one seat, and that's the ACT Party. And they, it's their role to say, no, there's no need for government and business. And so they're saying those sorts of things. They'd have definitely a different opinion, and what they'd want is the Post to just act, the New Zealand Post to live on its own feet, and then also what they'd want is for Kiwi Bank to be sold. So what it would mean is, they'd be looking for private providers to run New Zealand Post, and they'd be looking for maybe an overseas bank or something like that to look at Kiwi Bank. We disagree with that. We're a small country. We want to hang on to our assets, and we also, what Kiwi Bank has delivered is something unique, and we want to keep it. So what I do think that's the politics of the arguments here. There is, like, when I was researching this speech, I did talk to an academic who kind of gave the view that Kiwi Bank needs more funding, and it hasn't delivered because it's not giving dividends. But he also said that it's a long-term project, and if it can be assisted, up until 2015, that's okay, and then it will start returning dividends to its parent.
So thank you, brother. Australia.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation, George. Very informative. Just a question around the moves to go from I think you had 6-day delivery there, didn't you, in metro areas, down to 3 it's gone?
6-day delivery, yeah.
Yep. And how it remained at 5 days in rural areas. How did you campaign against that, and what lessons did you learn of anything that you can share with us here that might help us in the future?
Yeah. We campaigned on our view is that the EPMU's view is that we still think a 6-day delivery is a good idea, and we're asking the question: is it actually, is it too early to start dismantling that? We ran a campaign which was we did it on the internet. We also set up a website, and it was about talking. We also made submissions. The Council of Trade Unions made a submission to government for that bill. Well, no, it wasn't a bill, sorry. And also the EPMU made a submission. And what we were saying is, look, you've got to look at the wider what New Zealand New Zealand Post, and I suppose universality of postal. What the Post is all about. It's about communicating. And if you start reducing it, then what happens is, the way it looks like with Post is that if you are sort of internet savvy and you've got all the equipment to actually use that, well, that's fine. But what happens if you are, the elderly, the poor, and also in the rural areas? What happens then? Effectively, we're just declining the service, and like you say, it will go then to private providers. It will just get knocked off. So we ran that campaign. Then what's happening is we're engaging with the New Zealand Post, and we've set up a thing called the Delivery Working Group. And the Delivery Working Group is sitting down, looking at, because Post haven't made a decision yet, what the deed has done, and this is the deed of understanding, is it's given them the ability to go to 3-day delivery. But it can't go there until 2015. And then the other thing, what it has done is it said that for urban areas, it's 3-day delivery, and then for the rural areas, it's 5-day delivery. And that's only because of politics, you know. I mean, what is it? It's effectively the Conservative Party sort of thinking this is the, you know, the core sort of support of National Party support is in the rural sector, you see. So they had to be careful about how they approach this. So look, we're talking with the company right now. Unfortunately, I'm here, and I think on the 1st we've got another meeting, and I won't be there, but my colleague Joe Gallagher's going to be going along. And we're talking about how New Zealand Post is going to do that. And there's a number of issues they're looking at. Do they go to a 3-day delivery where it's Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, and then have delivering on one area, and then Monday, Wednesday and Friday do it that way? And they're not too sure. And then the other thing is, like I suggested, they've bought all this new equipment and they're trialling it at the moment around, have you seen the Postman Pat vehicles? They're called the Kaisbergs and the Paxters. Well, these are electronic, for posties. They can get a lot into the machine, and this is because with declining mail, what's happening is, the letters are still going to the same places, but they're just declining. So therefore, the posties have to cover a lot more distance with less mail. So they're going, well, okay, how are we going to try and resolve this? So they're looking at, electric machines, and then also they're saying, can we also do new products? And the new products they're thinking about, I don't know, is like community newspapers. Post doesn't deliver them in New Zealand, whereas they're thinking, well, with Fairfax, New Zealand, they've got community newspapers. Well, that's just, that could work. So they're going to trial that. New Zealand Post have got this view now, is if we're going to fail, we're going to fail quick, so we can get to what is successful. And that's what they want to do. So they're looking at all these sorts of options. They haven't made a decision about how they're going to do it. All really they know at this stage is that, they've got until 2015 to work it out. And so they're consulting with us over how that's going to look like.
Okay, thank you. So we don't have something for our friends of the, how do you call it, the live stream, but we have a comment. So it's a Great Postal Banking Symposium. Congratulations. And it had been posted at 9:45, which I could stay all day. We'll review video later. Thank you for providing webcast coverage. I will post on our website. So Mark Armstrong, Bank Act, Postal Banking for All Americans. So he was there, so I think it's a good comment to finish, and thank the two speakers talking about the model and all of that. So thank you for your presentation. And there's a little gift, un petit cadeau.